Pack it up! This is over! Richard shouted, his voice slicing through the Saturday morning air as vendors froze mid-sale. I turned, apron still on, watching him kick over a box of candles I'd spent weeks helping my neighbors make. The sharp smell of melted wax filled the air, mixing with the scent of kettle corn and barbecued ribs. For a moment, no one moved. Only the wind carried the sound of paper flyers fluttering down the street. That was the morning everything changed. My name's Sarah Mitchell, and for 2 years, I'd built what I thought was the heart of our little cul-de-sac in Cedar Creek, our weekend street market. It wasn't just a hobby, it was our pulse. Every Saturday, kids sold lemonade, veterans displayed handcrafted wood art, and retirees shared baked pies from old family recipes. The air smelled like cinnamon and hope. People smiled here. Strangers became friends. The market wasn't just on our street, it was our street. But Richard Holt never saw it that way. He was the kind of man who ironed his polo shirts before HOA meetings and measured the height of grass with a ruler. A retired banker with too much time and too little compassion. Ever since he'd taken over the HOA presidency, every event, every sound, every touch of color felt like a personal offense to him. Community standards, he'd say, waving a clipboard like a sword. The market, he claimed, violated HOA regulations about unapproved gatherings. So when he came storming down the street that morning, veins bulging, HOA badge gleaming, shouting orders like a general, I knew what he was doing wasn't about order. It was about control. Richard, I said, stepping between him and the tables. We've been doing this for 2 years without a single complaint. Why now? He glared at me over his sunglasses. Because I said so, Sarah. These are private streets, and I'm enforcing the rules. You people treat this place like a carnival. Behind him, kids clutched their crafts, unsure whether to run or cry. Mrs. Jenkins, who baked every Saturday to help pay for her medication, stood there shaking. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just about a few tents. This was about our right to belong in our own neighborhood. That night, I went to the HOA board meeting. I didn't expect much, but I wasn't ready for what I heard. Richard sat at the head of the long oak table, papers neatly stacked, that smug banker's smile plastered across his face. Effective immediately, he announced. No street commerce of any kind will be allowed within the HOA boundaries. Violators will be fined and subject to enforcement action. The room erupted. Neighbors protested. Vendors pleaded. But Richard just sat there, tapping his pen. When I spoke, he cut me off mid-sentence. This isn't up for debate, Ms. Mitchell. The motion has passed. That's when I realized something. He didn't care about the rules. He cared about winning. After the meeting, I walked home under the streetlights, the smell of wet asphalt and barbecue smoke still clinging to my clothes. Every booth, every smiling face, every sound of laughter echoed in my mind like ghosts of something beautiful he'd just destroyed. But as I reached my porch, something inside me shifted. If power could be abused, it could also be challenged. I looked back at the street where my market once stood and whispered to myself, if they shut down my market, I'll build one they can't touch. I didn't know it yet, but that promise would turn into a war, one that would test everything I thought I knew about neighbors, justice, and the true limits of HOA power. By sunrise, there it was, an orange HOA violation notice nailed straight through my front door like a warning shot. The metal tack was driven so deep it splintered the wood, and the paper flapped in the cool morning breeze like a flag of conquest. For a second, I just stood there in my robe, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the words printed in bold. Cease all unauthorized commerce immediately. $250 per day fines will apply. The scent of fresh rain mixed with sawdust from the damaged door as I peeled the paper off. My hands trembled. Not from fear, but from fury. Richard had made it personal. This wasn't an email, not a courtesy note, not even a conversation. He wanted a scene, a spectacle, something everyone walking their dog that morning could see. I could almost hear him saying, "Let that be a lesson." I turned around just in time to catch him standing at the end of the block, Phone raised, snapping photos of my house like some sort of code enforcement officer. He didn't even hide it. The smirk on his face told me everything I needed to know. He was enjoying this. I shouted across the street, "You can't do that, Richard." He pocketed his phone slowly. "HOA documentation, Sarah. You'll be hearing from us." Then he walked off like a man who'd just won a small war. All morning, I paced my living room. The notice sat on the counter beside an unpaid stack of bills. The words property lien made my stomach twist. A $250 fine per day could ruin me. That's how HOAs operated, death by paperwork. They didn't need muscle. They had bureaucracy. I called 3 neighbors, all of whom had received similar warnings after selling crafts or garden plants. "He's targeting you," one whispered, afraid to even say his name. Another said Richard threatened to suspend community privileges if anyone enabled my events. That's when something inside me snapped. If he wanted to play by the book, then I'd learn every page of that book. I opened my laptop and dove into county records, zoning maps, and municipal charters. Hours passed. I learned things most homeowners never think about. Who owns what? Where HOA jurisdiction begins and ends. What's private? What's city property? And that's when I found it. A color-coded zoning map of our subdivision. I zoomed in, tracing the pale gray lines that marked public easements. My eyes widened as I realized what it meant. The sidewalks that lined our neighborhood didn't belong to the HOA at all. They belonged to the city. I leaned back in my chair, heartbeat quickening. "Oh my God," I whispered. "He doesn't own the sidewalks." A spark lit in my chest. For the first time in days, I felt the balance shift. He could threaten, fine, and intimidate, but only within his little kingdom. Step outside those lines, and his authority vanished. That night, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights hummed to life, I walked the edge of the sidewalk, tracing the invisible border between his control and my freedom. Neighbors peeked from their windows, curious but silent. The cool concrete beneath my feet felt like a declaration of independence. HOAs cannot enforce rules beyond their property boundaries, I muttered to myself, repeating the legal language like a mantra. Sidewalks are city property, public easements. For the first time since Richard's tirade, I smiled. He wanted to bury me in rules, but I'd just found the one that would bury him instead. As I looked up at the rows of streetlights glowing against the night sky, an idea formed. Wild, risky, but perfect. If Richard hated my weekend market on private streets, then I'd build a new one on public ground. And this time, there wasn't a single thing he could do to stop it. When the city clerk said, "Technically the sidewalks are public easement," I nearly laughed out loud. Richard had just lost his kingdom by 12 inches of concrete. It was almost too perfect. There I was, sitting in the county zoning office, fluorescent lights buzzing above me, the smell of old paper and coffee in the air. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a badge that read Janet, pushed the zoning map across the counter. She pointed with a red pen, her voice dry and official. "See this line? That's the HOA boundary. Everything beyond it, sidewalk, curb, and easement, belongs to the city." I blinked, making sure I heard her right. So if someone, say hypothetically, hosted an event on the sidewalk? She shrugged. "As long as you're not blocking traffic or violating noise ordinances, the HOA can't touch you. Sidewalks are public access." It took everything in me not to grin like a maniac. The HOA's power stopped where the concrete began. The same sidewalks Richard strutted down with his clipboard and camera weren't his to claim at all. He'd built his empire on assumptions, not law. When I stepped out of the office, sunlight hit my face, and I swear, it felt like freedom. The city around me buzzed with motion. Food trucks, street performers, people living without permission slips. That's when the idea hit me like lightning. If Richard wanted to kill the Saturday market, I'd resurrect it somewhere he couldn't reach. Not just another market, something bolder, louder, unstoppable, a Night Bazaar. The vision built itself in my mind. String lights hanging from trees, local bands playing under the stars, tables filled with handmade crafts, food stalls, music, laughter. A celebration right on the sidewalks he thought he ruled. It wouldn't just be legal, it would be beautiful. That night, I called the old vendor group. They were hesitant at first, burned out from Richard's threats, but curiosity crept in. "You're telling me he can't stop us if it's on the sidewalk?" one asked. "Exactly," I said. "It's city property. The HOA has no jurisdiction. We'll stay within the public line, follow noise rules, and light up the street like a festival." Within a week, the buzz had spread. Local artists, bakers, and musicians, many of them people Richard had excluded from HOA events, signed up. I could feel the rebellion in their voices. We weren't just planning a market, we were taking back our street. I spent nights printing flyers at Kinko's, designing posters with phrases like "community belongs to everyone," and "join the Cedar Creek Night Bazaar, a market for the people." My dining table turned into a war room. Strings of fairy lights, vendor lists, permit applications, and a growing sense that we were part of something bigger than a neighborhood squabble. The first permit came through without issue. The city didn't even blink. "Sidewalk use for public event. Approved," the email read. Just like that, my plan had teeth. On the night of our first test run, a few vendors came by to help me measure the layout. We traced tape lines along the sidewalk, keeping everything exactly 1 foot outside the HOA's domain. It was symbolic, our invisible border of freedom. As we set up lights, the warm glow danced on the pavement, and I could already imagine the laughter and chatter filling the night. But as we stood admiring our work, my friend Lena turned to me, her voice low and uneasy. "Sarah, you really think he's just going to let this go? Richard's not the type to lose quietly." I smiled, though my pulse quickened. "He can't touch it, Lena. It's public property. This time we're untouchable." She hesitated, glancing at the rows of houses behind us, their windows dark and silent. "If he can't stop you legally," she said, "he'll find another way." Her words lingered in the cool night air, sinking into my thoughts like a storm cloud forming on the horizon. I didn't know it yet, but she was right. Richard Holt wasn't done with me. He was just getting started. "Take those tents down right now," Richard barked, storming into the crowd, veins bulging under his polo collar. The music faltered. A guitar string went silent mid-note, and a hush rippled across the bazaar like a cold wind through the lights. I was behind my booth arranging handmade signs when I heard the crowd shift. And then, there he was. Richard Holt, HOA badge gleaming under the streetlights, face flushed red with fury. The Night Bazaar had only just begun, but it was already everything I'd dreamed it would be. The sidewalks glowed under strings of warm light. Vendors smiled as families browsed tables of honey jars, handmade soaps, and local art. The smell of roasted corn and barbecue drifted down the street. Children danced barefoot near a small speaker, the laughter loud and free. It was the first time our neighborhood had felt alive again, and that's exactly why Richard couldn't stand it. He shoved his way past a group of teenagers, pointing at the tents like they were contraband. "This is a violation of HOA regulations," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "Pack this junk up before I start issuing fines." I stepped forward, wiping my hands on my apron. My voice was steady, but every nerve in my body was buzzing. "You can't issue fines here, Richard. We're on public sidewalks. You know that." He glared at me like I'd just spoken another language. "You think a little technicality is going to save you? These sidewalks are part of the neighborhood. The HOA maintains them." I pulled a folded sheet of paper from my back pocket, an official zoning map from the city. "Maintains, yes. Owns, no. This is public easement. City jurisdiction. You're trespassing right now, technically." A few neighbors gasped. Someone near the barbecue stand murmured, "She's right. It's city land." Richard's face twitched. "You're obstructing community order," he snapped, whipping out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead." I said, crossing my arms. Maybe they can explain it to you too. The crowd watched in tense silence as Richard paced, muttering into his phone. A few minutes later, the distant flash of blue lights glowed against the trees. The music stopped again. I could feel every eye in the street fixed on me. The officer stepped out of the cruiser, hand resting casually on his belt. "Evening, folks. What's the issue?" Richard pounced. "Officer, this woman is running an unauthorized event on HOA property. She's blocking access and violating our bylaws." The officer glanced at me, then down at the tents. "Ma'am, you have a city permit for this?" I nodded, handing over the printed approval. "Yes, sir. It's a sidewalk event under City Ordinance 1504 public easement use. We're clear to be here." He looked over the paperwork, then back at Richard. "Sir, this is city property. HOA bylaws don't apply here, as long as they're not obstructing traffic or breaking noise limits. There's no violation." The crowd broke into applause. Vendors cheered. Someone turned the music back on, louder this time. I could see Richard's jaw clench so tight it looked painful. "Officer, this is an abuse of city property." The officer cut him off. "Sir, I suggest you head home. You're causing a disturbance." That single sentence was a knockout blow. Richard stood there, humiliated, his authority stripped bare under the streetlights. He shot me a look so cold it could have frozen fire. "This isn't over," he muttered. He turned away, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and sharp as he walked off into the night. "Then we'll handle this ourselves," I heard him say. I didn't know who "we" was, but the way he said it sent a chill crawling down my spine. The bazaar roared back to life around me, but all I could feel was the storm brewing behind that calm, polished smile of his. Richard Holt had just lost the first battle, and men like him don't lose quietly. "Ma'am, we got a call about an illegal gathering," the officer said, hand resting on his belt. My heart pounded, but then he turned to Richard. "Sir, this isn't HOA property." It was déjà vu, only louder. The second night of the Cedar Creek Night Bazaar was in full swing. The air was thick with the smell of roasted corn and cinnamon donuts. Music from a local guitarist drifted between booths, and laughter filled every inch of the sidewalk. For the first time in years, our street felt alive, not controlled. Then the cruiser rolled in, blue and red lights cutting across the rows of vendors like a siren warning us that freedom had an expiration date. Richard walked right beside the officer, chest puffed up, clipboard in hand. He looked smug, like he'd finally found his smoking gun. "Officer," he began, loud enough for everyone to hear, "this event is in violation of HOA policy. These people are obstructing community pathways and causing disorder. I'm requesting immediate dispersal." I stood at my booth, hands trembling slightly as the officer approached. "Ma'am," he said, polite but firm. "Are you the organizer?" "Yes," I said, holding out the permit I'd printed and laminated. "And we have authorization from the city under Sidewalk Easement Code. We're within noise limits, no traffic obstruction, and we're using only public space." The officer took the paper, scanning it carefully. He nodded once, then turned to Richard. "Sir, this is a public easement. HOA bylaws don't extend to this area." The words hit Richard like a slap. "That's absurd," he snapped. "The sidewalks belong to the neighborhood." The officer didn't flinch. "They belong to the city. You can't enforce HOA rules here. Unless you've got a city ordinance or police report about actual criminal activity, I'm not shutting this down." The crowd was silent for a moment, and then the cheers started. Someone whistled. Vendors clapped. The guitarist strummed a victorious chord. Richard's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. He tried to talk over the noise, waving his clipboard like a flag of defeat. "You people are turning this community into chaos," he shouted. "You're violating freedom of assembly," I said, cutting him off. My voice was calm, but my pulse thundered. "That's what this is, Richard. It's a constitutional right, and I'm pretty sure even your clipboard can't overrule that." The officer gave me a small smile before addressing the crowd. "You folks have a good night. Stay safe, Keep the sidewalks clear and don't let anyone tell you where you can or can't stand. And with that, he tipped his hat and walked back to the cruiser. The music picked back up immediately, louder and prouder. A little girl ran past carrying a sparkler. Someone offered the officer a donut through his car window and he took it with a grin. The entire street buzzed with the electric joy of victory. I turned back to my booth as neighbors came up to thank me. "You did it, Sarah," one woman said, clutching her husband's arm. "You stood up to him. You made this place feel like home again." But through the crowd, I caught sight of Richard. He stood in the shadows, watching me. His phone glowed blue against his face as he dialed a number, his lips moving fast and tight. I couldn't hear his words, but I could read his expression. Cold, calculating, unbroken. The man had lost the battle, but not his thirst for control. As he turned and walked toward his car, his voice carried faintly over the music. "If the cops won't help, the lawyers will." I watched his taillights fade into the night and felt that old familiar knot return in my chest. The bazaar had survived the HOA's wrath, but the real war was just beginning. The next morning my cables were cut clean through, lights shattered, and tire marks carved across the sidewalk. Richard's SUV on the camera feed told the story. For a full minute, I just stood there, staring at the wreckage. The scent of burnt rubber hung thick in the air, mixing with the sharp tang of torn wires. My once beautiful string lights, those warm amber bulbs that had turned our sidewalks into something magical, were smashed into glittering shards along the curb. Tables were overturned, banners ripped, and a trash can lay on its side, its contents spilled like an open wound. It looked less like vandalism and more like a message. My stomach twisted. This wasn't some random act of mischief. Someone had targeted us, targeted me. I knelt down, tracing my fingers over the flattened patch of dirt where our community bazaar banner had stood. My throat burned with anger and disbelief. We'd spent weeks building this dream together, and in one night, someone had tried to crush it. But the most chilling detail came when I checked the small motion camera I'd mounted near my porch. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Headlights flared across the frame, followed by the familiar outline of a dark SUV. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. I paused the video, zooming in on the license plate. Even through the static, I recognized it instantly. Richard Holt's silver Escalade. My hands trembled as I rewound it again and again. The SUV slowed right beside the lights, and a door opened. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the same white jacket Richard wore at every HOA meeting. He didn't even try to hide his face from the camera. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. At first, I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding too hard to think clearly. Call the police? File a report? Or would he just twist it somehow? Make it seem like I was framing him? That's what men like Richard did. They broke things and still found a way to play the victim. But I wasn't going to let fear win. By noon, I had every neighbor who cared about the bazaar standing with me. Lena brought her toolbox. The Garcia twins rewired the string lights. Mrs. Jenkins swept up the glass. Even the kids helped, taping the banners back together with bright, mismatched tape. The smell of coffee and determination filled the air. We were rebuilding, not because we had to, but because we refused to let one man's ego destroy something that belonged to everyone. As we worked, I documented everything. Photos, timestamps, witness statements, the video file copied onto a flash drive. My hands steadied as I wrote each note. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. That evening, the bazaar lights flickered back to life. Not as bright, maybe, but stronger in spirit. Families came out again, cautious but proud. The hum of music returned, and so did the laughter. Richard didn't show up that night. I half expected his SUV to crawl past, but it didn't. Still, the thought of him watching from behind his blinds made my skin prickle. Lena handed me a cup of cocoa and nodded toward the repaired setup. "He wanted to scare you off," she said. "Looks like it didn't work." I smiled faintly, though my chest ached from exhaustion. No, I whispered. It didn't. But as I locked up that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the footage. Richard had crossed a line, and now I had proof. Real, undeniable proof. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop one last time before bed, watching the headlights sweep across the frame. The timestamp blinked again. 2:14 a.m. That was the moment everything changed. I closed the laptop, my reflection staring back in the dark screen. "All right, Richard," I murmured. "You wanted a fight. Now you've got one. Play the video," I said, and when Richard's face appeared on the projector, the room went dead silent. The HOA's monthly board meeting had never been this crowded. Every chair was taken, every wall lined with neighbors whispering and craning their necks to see. The room smelled of coffee, sweat, and tension. The chatter stopped the moment I stepped up to the podium with my laptop tucked under my arm. Richard sat at the front table in his usual spot, flanked by two board members, his face calm but eyes sharp, like a man confident he'd already won. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You have 2 minutes for homeowner remarks. Please keep your comments civil." "Oh, they'll be civil," I said. "Just illuminating." I connected my laptop to the projector cable. The screen flickered, and for a brief second, I caught Richard's smirk falter. The first frame showed a grainy shot of our street at night. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 2:14 a.m. "This was taken from my security camera," I said clearly, after the bazaar lights were destroyed. Someone in the back gasped as the video began to play. The headlights swept across the sidewalk, then slowed. Richard's silver Escalade appeared in perfect view. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a white jacket. He walked toward the light cables, crouched, and a second later, darkness. The screen froze on the man's face as he turned back toward the car. Even through the pixelation, there was no mistaking him. It was Richard. The room erupted. Murmurs, gasps, someone actually shouted, "Is that really him?" Another voice whispered, "Oh my God, he cut the lights." Richard's face went pale. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "That video is doctored. You can't—" "It's not doctored," I said evenly. "It's time-stamped, geotagged, and already backed up with the City Code Enforcement Office. I just wanted to share it here first. You know, neighbor to neighbor." The board members exchanged nervous glances. One woman, Ellen, the treasurer, leaned forward. "Richard, is that you?" Richard slammed his fist on the table. "This is a smear campaign. She's violating HOA procedure and defaming a sitting president." "No," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "This is accountability." The room fell quiet again. I looked around at the faces, people I'd known for years, people who'd been afraid to speak up. I could see something changing in their expressions. Fear giving way to anger. Ellen cleared her throat. "We should address this seriously, Richard. The community deserves answers." He turned on her, pointing a finger. "Don't you start, Ellen. You all let her make a circus of this place." The tension in the room snapped. Residents began shouting over one another, some defending me, others demanding Richard step down. Someone yelled, "He's out of control." Another voice called, "Resign." The chaos built until Richard stood, his chair screeching back. His face was red, his voice shaking with rage. "You'll regret this, Sarah," he hissed, the words slicing through the room. "You think you can humiliate me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." He stormed out, shoving past neighbors as the projector screen still glowed behind him, frozen on his own incriminating image. The door slammed so hard the lights flickered. The meeting ended in a daze. Board members muttered about emergency votes and code of conduct violations, but I barely heard them. My hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline. For the first time, Richard wasn't untouchable. The truth was out, and the whole neighborhood had seen it. When I got home that night, the street was quiet. My porch light flickered as I turned my key, exhaustion settling in. On my doorstep, a plain white envelope waited. My name was printed neatly across the front. I tore it open. Inside, A single sheet of paper read, "Notice of civil action, Holt versus Mitchell." The fight wasn't over. It was just changing battlegrounds. A man in a suit handed me the envelope and smiled like he'd already won. Inside, Holt v. Mitchell. The paper trembled in my hands as I read the words. It was real. Richard had made good on his threat. The HOA was suing me for public nuisance, defamation, and willful interference with community harmony. It sounded like a bad joke, except the numbers on the last page weren't funny at all. $25,000 in damages. My stomach dropped. Outside, the wind rustled the street banners we'd hung for the next weekend's bazaar. They fluttered proudly, but all I could feel was dread. I wasn't just fighting an HOA anymore. I was fighting a machine. A legal one, built on money and intimidation. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside felt like a new threat. My mind spun with possibilities. What if they froze my bank account, or put a lien on my home? That's how HOAs won. They exhausted you, drained you, made you too tired to fight back. But then I remembered what Richard said in that meeting. "You'll regret this." And suddenly fear burned into something else. Resolve. The next morning, I walked into the downtown office of James Carter, a civil rights attorney recommended by one of the vendors. He was mid-40s, calm, sharp, with sleeves rolled up and a quiet confidence that said he'd seen worse bullies than Richard Holt. He skimmed through the lawsuit, his expression unreadable. "Classic HOA intimidation tactic," he said finally. "They file something heavy, hope you panic and settle. But Sarah, this thing's full of holes." "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the papers. "They're accusing you of public nuisance on public property. That's not their jurisdiction. And defamation? You showed a factual video. Truth is an absolute defense." Relief washed over me like a slow exhale. "So we can fight it?" He smiled. "Not just fight it. We'll counterclaim." That word sounded like music. James explained the strategy. We'd file a counterclaim for harassment, retaliation, and abuse of authority. And then he dropped a legal term that became my new favorite weapon, anti-SLAPP. He explained, "It stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. It's what bullies use to silence critics. But under state law, if we can prove this lawsuit was meant to intimidate or punish you for speaking out, the court can dismiss it and force the HOA to pay your legal fees." I felt something I hadn't in weeks: power. We spent days preparing the case. James asked for every document: emails, notices, the vandalism report, meeting footage. I gave him everything. He organized it all into neat folders, labeling each one like a chess move. Watching him work was like watching calm precision dismantle chaos. When the HOA's attorney finally called, James had his tone rehearsed, polite but deadly. "We're not settling," he said simply. "You filed a meritless suit. We'll see you in court." Word spread fast through the neighborhood. By the next HOA bulletin, everyone knew. Richard tried to spin it, claiming I'd slandered the association and divided the community. But I could see the shift in people's faces when they passed me on the sidewalk. They weren't buying it anymore. The court date came faster than I expected. The hearing would be open to the public. That meant neighbors, vendors, anyone could sit in and watch. The idea made my stomach twist with both fear and satisfaction. On the morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse beside James, the smell of polished wood and cold marble filling the air. My palms were slick, my heart pounding, but I kept my chin up. Across the hallway, Richard stood in his crisp navy suit, arms folded, smirking like a man convinced justice had a price tag and he could afford it. James leaned toward me, voice calm and low. "Let him smile," he said. "He has no idea what's coming." I looked at Richard one last time before the bailiff opened the doors and called our names. The smile on his face didn't scare me anymore. If anything, it fueled me. This wasn't just about my market anymore. It was about standing up to every HOA bully who thought they owned people instead of property. When Richard took the stand, he smirked. When the zoning officer took the next, That smirk vanished. The courtroom was colder than I expected, sterile, quiet, every sound amplified by the echo of marble floors and wooden benches. I sat beside my attorney, James Carter, my palms pressed together so tightly they ached. Richard sat across the aisle, immaculate as ever in a tailored navy suit. He smiled at me, that same smug curve of lips I'd seen when he posted that first violation notice on my door. But this time, the smile looked forced, cracked at the edges. The judge entered, stern, older, her gavel hitting the desk with a sharp crack that silenced the room. Case number 23-117, Holt versus Mitchell. Counsel, you may proceed. The HOA's attorney, a man named Clay Whitmore, stood first. Slick hair, expensive pen, and a voice that dripped arrogance. Your Honor, the defendant has willfully and repeatedly violated community regulations by hosting unauthorized commercial events. These activities disrupted the peace, created safety hazards, and defamed my client, Mr. Holt, through public accusations of misconduct. He gestured toward me like I was on trial for treason. James rose next, calm as ever. Your Honor, the HOA's claims are baseless. The so-called unauthorized events took place entirely on public sidewalks, areas outside HOA jurisdiction. Furthermore, the defendant acted lawfully and with full city permits. As for defamation, truth is not defamation, and we have the evidence to prove every statement. The judge nodded slowly. Proceed with testimony. Richard was called first. He swaggered to the witness stand like it was his stage, hand raised for the oath with theatrical solemnity. Mr. Holt, Whitmore began, how has Ms. Mitchell's conduct affected the community? Richard sighed deeply, looking every bit the wounded patriot. Your Honor, I've served this community for 8 years. Her so-called market, these bazaars, turned our peaceful streets into chaos. Noise, trash, trespassing. I had to act to protect property values and preserve order. I clenched my jaw. James didn't move. He just flipped open a folder. Mr. Holt, he began when it was our turn to cross-examine. You've stated that the sidewalks in question belong to the HOA. On what basis? Richard adjusted his tie. They're part of our maintenance agreement. So you maintain them. Do you own them? Richard hesitated. We manage their upkeep. James slid a printed document across the bench. City zoning records. They show the sidewalks as public easement, owned and governed by the city of Cedar Creek. So you have no legal authority to regulate them, correct? Richard's lips tightened. That's irrelevant. Actually, James said, voice sharp, it's the foundation of your entire case. The judge leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. Mr. Holt, are you suggesting your HOA attempted to enforce bylaws on city property? Richard stammered. I was acting in good faith, Your Honor. That's when James called our next witness, the city zoning officer, Janet Fields. She walked in holding a stack of documents, her badge glinting under the courtroom lights. Ms. Fields, James asked, can you confirm the ownership of the sidewalks adjacent to Cedar Creek Drive? Yes, she said clearly. They're public. Maintained by the city. The HOA has no enforcement authority there whatsoever. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Richard's smirk evaporated. The judge tapped her pen against the bench, her tone sharp. It appears the HOA has significantly overstepped its authority. Filing a lawsuit over property, it doesn't control borders on abuse of power. Richard's attorney tried to recover, mumbling something about community safety, but the damage was done. The judge looked directly at me. Ms. Mitchell, you acted within your rights as a citizen. The court acknowledges that the HOA's jurisdiction stops at its property boundaries. That single sentence felt like oxygen after weeks of drowning. Still, the judge wasn't finished. She shuffled papers, then looked at both sides. Given the circumstances, I will review all submissions and deliver my written decision shortly. Her gavel came down once, echoing through the room like thunder. Court is adjourned. As we stood, Richard brushed past me, his cologne strong, his whisper colder than ice. Enjoy your little victory, Sarah. It's not over. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because for the first time his confidence felt hollow. Now the only thing left was the ruling and the truth finally in writing. The envelope arrived 2 weeks later. The ruling. Case dismissed with prejudice. HOA ordered to reimburse costs. For a few seconds, I just stared at the page, not breathing. The legal language swam before my eyes, but the meaning was crystal clear. I'd won. The court had ruled in my favor completely. Every accusation thrown out, every threat neutralized. Richard's lawsuit wasn't just dead. It was buried for good. A sob rose in my throat before I could stop it. I sat down right there on my porch steps, the ruling clutched in my shaking hands, tears blurring the words. After months of harassment, sleepless nights, and humiliation, justice had finally come home. When I read the fine print, it got even better. The HOA wasn't just ordered to drop the suit. It had to pay my legal fees and issue a formal public apology to me within 30 days. The phrase abuse of authority appeared twice in the judge's written opinion. I could almost hear the gavel striking again, this time echoing like freedom. I called James immediately. "You did it," I said, still half in disbelief. He chuckled softly. "No, Sarah, you did it. I just handed them their own bylaws." That night, I hosted a small celebration with the vendors. The bazaar was brighter than ever. Music, food, laughter filling the air like victory itself. People brought flowers, cards, even balloons that read "Bazaar Justice." Someone made a sign out of the court, ruling, and taped it to the main tent like a banner of defiance. Mrs. Jenkins hugged me with trembling arms. "You gave us our street back," she said. "You didn't just win for you. You won for all of us." The story spread fast. By the next morning, the local paper had run a headline: "Homeowner defeats HOA in landmark ruling. Bazaar declared legal." The HOA board called an emergency meeting within days. I didn't attend, but the next morning, another notice appeared. This time, not on my door, but on every mailbox in Cedar Creek. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, signed by the vice president. "We extend a formal apology to Ms. Sarah Mitchell for prior enforcement actions deemed unlawful. The HOA acknowledges the bazaar's right to operate within city easement areas." And just beneath that, in smaller print, "Effective immediately, Richard Holt is removed as HOA president pending review." When I read it aloud to Lena, she laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. "Guess King Richard just lost his crown," she said. The following weekend, the bazaar was the biggest it had ever been. We had more vendors than tables. Live music, food trucks lined along the street. It felt like the heart of the neighborhood had doubled in size overnight. People came not just to buy and sell, but to be part of something that had beaten the odds. As I walked through the glowing rows of tents, I caught sight of familiar faces, neighbors who had once looked away now smiling, shaking my hand, thanking me. I felt light for the first time in months. The fear, the sleeplessness, the anger, it all melted away under the warm hum of lights and laughter. I looked up at the string lights, glittering like tiny stars across the night, and thought, "We did it. We actually did it." But as the last of the crowd trickled home, I returned to my porch and saw something resting on the welcome mat. A plain white envelope, no stamp, no name. My stomach tightened. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, no signature. "You may have won the case," it read, "but not the war." The wind picked up, rustling the paper in my hands. I looked out toward the darkened street, the last of the bazaar lights fading in the distance. The celebration might have ended, but I could feel it in my bones. Richard Holt wasn't done with me yet. When Richard stepped up to the mic to apologize, his smirk told me it wasn't over. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when the HOA announced their public reconciliation event. The notice had been printed in perfect bureaucratic language, dripping with false sincerity. "A chance," it said, "to restore unity and goodwill within the Cedar Creek community." But everyone knew what it really was: a public relations stunt to clean up Richard Holt's mess. The meeting took place in the neighborhood park, the same place he once banned for unauthorized gatherings. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Folding chairs formed neat rows facing a makeshift podium, a banner behind it reading Cedar Creek, moving forward together. I stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, trying not to laugh at the sight of Richard in a crisp gray suit and sunglasses, looking more like a politician than a man who'd just been publicly humiliated. When his name was called, he strutted to the mic. The chatter died instantly. He cleared his throat. As former president of the HOA, he began, his voice steady but cold, I would like to express regret for the misunderstandings that occurred regarding Ms. Mitchell's events. Misunderstandings. The word tasted bitter, even from where I stood. He continued, while certain actions may have been misinterpreted, my intentions were always in the best interest of preserving community standards and safety. I hope we can all move past these distractions and remember what matters: order, peace, and property value. That last phrase, property value, set the crowd murmuring. People shifted, glancing at one another. He wasn't apologizing. He was rewriting history. Then he looked directly at me. Ms. Mitchell, I trust you'll be more cooperative in the future. This community works best when we all follow the rules. The silence that followed was suffocating. For a moment, I thought about letting it go, just walking away with my dignity intact. But the fire in my chest said otherwise. I stepped forward. May I asked one of the HOA's board members, gesturing to the mic. The man hesitated, then nodded. When I faced the crowd, I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. You know, I began, this whole thing started because I wanted to build something that brought us together. A place where neighbors could meet, laugh, and share what they loved. The bazaar wasn't chaos. It was community. And if that's something that threatens anyone's version of order, then maybe their version of order is the problem. A ripple of applause started in the back row. I took a breath and kept going. I didn't win a lawsuit to prove I was right. I fought because I was tired of watching fear control good people. We have a right to gather, to create, to belong, and no board, no title, no bylaw can take that away. That last line landed like thunder. The applause grew until it filled the park. Even the vendors from the bazaar, who had set up tables just beyond the HOA's perimeter, cheered. Someone shouted, "Tell him, Sarah," and laughter rippled through the crowd. Richard's face twisted, the smug calm gone. He turned away from the mic, muttering something to one of the board members, but no one was listening to him anymore. The people he'd ruled through fear were now united, and they weren't afraid of him. Legal nugget. Under First Amendment protections, residents in public or semi-public spaces have the right to assemble peacefully as long as events are non-commercial and lawful. It's something Richard had always ignored, but now the entire neighborhood knew it by heart. I looked around, my chest rising and falling with pride. For the first time, Cedar Creek didn't feel divided. It felt alive. Then, as the applause began to fade, a low rumble echoed down the street. Heads turned. A white van pulled up beside the park, emblazoned with the logo of Channel 7 News. A cameraman stepped out, adjusting his lens. A reporter followed, notepad in hand, scanning the crowd. "Ms. Mitchell?" she called, spotting me. "Channel 7. We'd like to hear your story." The crowd broke into fresh applause. My heart pounded as I glanced toward Richard. His expression hardened, the color draining from his face. This wasn't just local gossip anymore. It was going public, and the whole city was about to find out what really happens when an HOA goes too far. Under the glow of string lights, I watched kids dance on the same sidewalks Richard once tried to police, and I realized I'd built something stronger than fear. The Channel 7 segment aired 3 days after the apology. The story spread faster than I ever imagined. HOA overreach backfires. Local woman defends her right to community. The headline read. They showed footage of our bazaar. Families laughing, vendors smiling, guitars strumming under the trees. The anchor's voiceover said, What began as a neighborhood dispute became a symbol of grassroots resistance and the power of standing up to unfair authority. It was surreal watching my little street on the evening news. Vendors who once feared HOA fines now stood proudly in front of cameras, sharing how the market brought the community together. Kids waved handmade signs that said, "Go Sarah," and "Our street, our market." What had started as one woman's stand against a power-drunk HOA president had become a full-blown movement. By the following week, the city council got involved, not to shut us down, but to celebrate us. The mayor herself came to visit the bazaar, shaking hands with vendors and sampling fresh churros from Mrs. Jenkins' table. She smiled at me and said, "You've turned this place into something special, Miss Mitchell. Cedar Creek needed this." The next month, the city passed a resolution naming our event an official community fixture, the Cedar Creek Night Bazaar. First Saturday of every month. They even provided new public lighting along the sidewalks to support future events. What used to be a battleground had become a landmark. Meanwhile, the HOA's power crumbled from within. After the lawsuit fiasco and the televised backlash, members began resigning one by one. The community voted to revise the bylaws, stripping the board of its overreaching authority and establishing a rule that any new regulation required a neighborhood vote. For the first time, we all had a say. As for Richard Holt, he vanished almost as quickly as he'd appeared. One morning, a moving truck sat outside his house. By noon, he was gone. No goodbyes, no explanations, just a for sale sign swaying in the breeze where his pride used to stand. Rumor was he'd taken a new job in another state, though I doubted anyone had hired him to manage another neighborhood. The night after he left, the bazaar felt different. Lighter, freer. The air smelled of roasted corn and triumph. I walked through the rows of booths, hearing music, laughter, the buzz of life that no meeting or bylaw could ever suppress. Lena caught up to me near the lemonade stand. "You did it?" she said. I smiled. "No, we did." She nodded toward the crowd. "Think he's watching somewhere?" I glanced down the street where Richard's house used to stand, the porch light forever dark. "Maybe," I said. "But this isn't his story anymore." As the final song of the night played, I stood in the middle of the street and looked around. The lights, the people, the energy, it was everything he'd tried to erase. And yet, here it was, brighter than ever. I took the mic from the musician and turned to the crowd. 2 years ago, this market was shut down by fear, I said. But fear only wins when we stay quiet. Never let a signature on paper silence a community. Applause erupted. Some people cried. Others chanted my name. But what mattered most wasn't me. It was the unity glowing in every face around me. So to anyone watching, anyone listening, I say this. Ever stood up to an HOA bully? Drop your story below, because stories like ours deserve to be told and heard. The crowd began to disperse, laughter still echoing through the night. I turned off the last string of lights and felt a strange calm settle over me. The war was over, or so I thought, because as I looked at the empty sidewalk, a thought crept into my mind, sharp and chilling. But my next fight? They tried to bulldoze my backyard.